I thought I'd seen rock bottom when I discovered my wife had secretly buried us $47,000 in debt. But that was nothing compared to the moment she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Apologize or leave," in my own kitchen, defending the stepson who hadn't worked a day in 6 months. My name is Lester Hawkins. I'm 58 years old, and I've been fixing generators and backup power systems for 23 years. Been married to Beverly for 19 of those years, raising her 2 boys like they were my own blood. Quinn's 24 now, fresh out of college with a degree in something useless. And Elijah's 21, still figuring out what he wants to do with his life. The thing about generator repair is that people only call you when the lights go out. Hurricane season, ice storms, power grid failures. That's when my phone rings off the hook. I've crawled through more flooded basements and climbed more rickety ladders than I care to count. My hands are permanently stained with diesel fuel, and my back sounds like bubble wrap when I get out of bed. But it pays the bills. Or at least, it used to. Beverly never understood the business. To her, I was just a guy who came home smelling like motor oil and left early in the morning with a truck full of tools. She handled the books, or so I thought. Turns out she was about as good with money as Quinn was with holding down a job. The first red flag should have been when she started getting defensive about the credit card statements. "It's just household expenses, Les," she'd say, waving her hand like I was being paranoid. Quinn needed new clothes for interviews, and Elijah's car needed work. Second red flag was Quinn's new gaming setup. Kid had a computer that cost more than my monthly truck payment, sitting in the bedroom that used to be my workshop before Beverly decided he needed more space. When I asked about it, Quinn just shrugged. "Mom said I deserve something nice after graduation," Quinn told me, not even looking up from his screen. Third red flag was the stack of overdue notices Beverly tried to hide behind the coffee maker. Electric company, credit card companies, even the insurance on the shop. I found them by accident when I was looking for the spare truck keys. That's when I started digging deeper. Turned out Beverly had been playing financial Jenga for months, moving money around, opening new credit lines, borrowing against the house. All to keep Quinn comfortable and Elijah happy while I worked 16-hour days. The worst part, she never said a word. Just kept smiling, kept cooking dinner, kept asking about my day like we weren't 3 months behind on the mortgage. I confronted her on a Tuesday night. Had all the statements spread out on the kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Beverly walked in from her book club, took one look at the papers, and her face went pale. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my hands shaking. That conversation lasted until 2 in the morning. Tears, accusations, blame flying in every direction. By the end of it, I learned we were $47,000 in debt, the house was in jeopardy, and my wife had been living in a fantasy world where money grew on trees. The next morning, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger. A man who'd been so busy keeping everyone else's lights on the heat, let his own world go dark. That was 3 weeks ago. Today, everything falls apart. The morning after our financial disaster conversation, I got up at 5 a.m., like always, and headed to the shop. Had 3 generator repairs scheduled and a new installation at the Morrison farm. Work doesn't stop just because your world's falling apart. But my head wasn't in it. Nearly electrocuted myself twice trying to wire up a transfer switch because I kept thinking about those credit card statements. $47,000. The number kept bouncing around my skull like a pinball. When I got home that evening, Beverly was in the kitchen making Quinn's favorite dinner, steak and mashed potatoes. Like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't spent half the night going through receipts for things I never knew we bought. "How was your day, honey?" Beverly asked, not even looking at me. I stared at her. This woman who'd been lying to my face for months, maybe years. "How was my day?" "Really, Bev?" Quinn looked up from his phone. "What's his problem now?" he asked Beverly, like I wasn't standing right there. That's when something inside me snapped. "My problem, Quinn, is that your mother has put us so far in debt that we might lose the house. My problem is that you're 24 years old, living rent-free, while I work myself into the ground paying for your gaming computer and your mother's shopping habits." Quinn rolled his eyes. "Here we go with the rent talk again. You sound like some landlord trying to evict us." Beverly slammed her spatula down on the counter. "Lester, don't you dare take your stress out on my boys. Quinn is looking for work, and Elijah is trying to figure out his future." "Looking for work?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's been looking for 6 months. Meanwhile, I'm pulling 16-hour days to keep the lights on. You don't understand the job market these days, Beverly said, her voice getting that sharp edge it gets when she's cornered. It's not like when you started working. Things are different. Different? You know what's different, Bev? I never had my stepfather paying my bills when I was 24. I was out there earning my keep. Elijah, who'd been quiet up until then, finally spoke up. Maybe we should all just calm down and talk about this like adults. But Quinn wasn't having it. Talk about what? Him being a control freak about money? This is 2024, not 1950. People live with their parents longer now. I looked around that kitchen. The kitchen I'd remodeled with my own hands, the table I'd built from reclaimed wood, the light fixture I'd installed after the old one fell during a storm. Everything in that house had my sweat and blood in it. You want to know what's old-fashioned, Quinn? Working for a living. Taking responsibility. Not expecting someone else to fund your lifestyle while you play video games. Beverly stepped between us, her face flushed with anger. Lester, you're being unreasonable. These are my children, and I won't have you talking to them like this. Your children? I've been raising them for 19 years, Bev. I taught Quinn how to drive. I walked Elijah through his homework every night when he was struggling in school. But now they're just your children when it's convenient. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could hear the generator humming in the basement, the one I'd installed myself to keep this family comfortable during power outages. Beverly's voice was ice cold when she finally spoke. You need to apologize to Quinn and Elijah for your attitude, or you can leave this house. I stared at her. After everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd built, she was giving me an ultimatum in my own kitchen. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I looked at Beverly standing there in our kitchen, her face flushed with righteous anger, defending the two men who'd been bleeding us dry for months. The same kitchen where I'd installed new cabinets with my own hands, working weekends to save money we apparently didn't have. The same table where I'd helped both boys with their homework for years, back when they still respected me enough to listen. Apologize or leave, Beverly repeated, her voice steady but cold as winter steel. I won't have you disrespecting my children in this house. Quinn leaned back in his chair, that smug grin spreading across his face like he'd won some kind of victory. Yeah, maybe you should cool off somewhere else until you remember how to treat family properly. Elijah shifted uncomfortably, but didn't say anything to defend me. Just stared at his plate like the answers to life were written in those mashed potatoes I'd bought with money from a 12-hour workday. I stood there feeling the weight of 19 years pressing down on my shoulders. 19 years of getting up before dawn to chase emergency generator calls. 19 years of crawling through flooded basements and climbing icy ladders while other families stayed warm and safe. 19 years of missing fishing trips, ball games, and quiet Sunday mornings because someone's backup power had failed during a storm. You know what, Bev? I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. You're absolutely right. I should leave. But I didn't apologize. Didn't grovel or beg forgiveness like she clearly expected. Instead, I walked to the hall closet, grabbed my heavy work jacket, and headed for the door. The same door I'd rehung twice after Quinn slammed it too hard during his teenage tantrums. Lester, where exactly do you think you're going? Beverly called after me, her voice suddenly uncertain, like maybe she'd overplayed her hand. I paused at the doorway and looked back at the three of them sitting around that kitchen table. 3 people who'd been living off my sweat and sacrifice while treating me like hired help who'd gotten too big for his britches. I'm choosing option 3, I said, pulling my keys from the hook by the door. What does that mean? Beverly demanded. It means I'm not apologizing for telling the truth, and I'm not staying where I'm clearly not wanted. The screen door closed behind me with a soft click. No slamming, no dramatic storming out. Just a man walking away from people who'd forgotten his worth somewhere between the first bill he'd paid and the last time they'd bothered saying thank you. I climbed into my truck and sat there for a minute, engine running, looking at the house I'd maintained for 2 decades. Every shingle replaced, every gutter cleaned, every electrical problem fixed. I'd touched it all with these hands. But it wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with legs and a strong back. I put the truck in reverse and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Beverly standing at the window, probably thinking I'd circle the block and come back begging for forgiveness like some whipped dog. She was wrong. Dead wrong. I ended up at Danny's Diner on Route 9, nursing a cup of coffee that had been sitting too long and watching the rain streak down the windows. The place was nearly empty except for a couple of long-haul truckers sharing war stories and an old man reading yesterday's newspaper under the flickering fluorescent lights. My phone buzzed against my thigh. Beverly, no doubt. I let it go to voicemail without even checking the screen. It buzzed again 10 minutes later, then again 5 minutes after that. Each buzz felt like a small electric shock, reminding me of the life I just walked away from. Finally, I pulled the phone out, turned it completely off, and shoved it deep into my jacket pocket. The waitress, a woman about my age with tired but kind eyes, appeared beside my booth with a coffee pot. "Rough night, honey," she asked as she topped off my cup. You could say that. I managed what probably looked like a weak smile. Sometimes a man needs to step back and remember who he was before everyone else started telling him who he should be. She nodded like she'd heard that story 100 times before. Food helps with that kind of thinking. Our meatloaf's not fancy, but it's honest. Honest food sounds perfect right about now. She smiled and moved on to check on the truckers, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the sound of rain on the diner's metal roof. I stayed there until they closed at midnight, making that one cup of coffee and a plate of meatloaf last 3 hours while I tried to figure out what the hell came next. When they finally kicked me out, I drove to the 24-hour truck stop just outside town, parked my pickup between two big rigs and reclined the seat as far as it would go. The parking lot was lit up bright as daylight, but somehow it felt more peaceful than my own bedroom had in months. Around 3 a.m., the rain picked up, drumming harder against the truck's roof. I watched the drops race down the windshield and thought about all the storms I'd weathered over the years, literal and otherwise. Hurricane Isabel back in '03, when I worked 3 straight days without sleep getting people's backup power running. The ice storm of '09 that knocked out electricity for half the county. The recession of '08 when work got scarce and I had to take side jobs just to keep food on the table. I'd always been the guy people called when their world went dark. The reliable one. The fixer. But what happened when the fixer needed fixing? Who was Lester Hawkins when he wasn't crawling through someone else's basement or climbing someone else's roof? Maybe it was time to find out. For the first time in my adult life, I had nobody depending on me for tomorrow's emergency call. The rain kept falling, and I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I slept without worrying about what crisis would be waiting for me when the sun came up. When I woke up in that truck stop parking lot, the sun was already climbing over the horizon, painting everything gold and orange like a promise of something better. My back ached from sleeping in the driver's seat, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. I drove to a gas station, bought a toothbrush and some coffee, and tried to figure out what came next. In the restroom mirror, I looked like a man who'd been through a war, which in a way, I had been. Back home, Beverly was probably just waking up, expecting to find me sleeping on the couch like I had after our previous fights. She'd make her coffee, check to see if I was properly ashamed of myself, then start the process of letting me know how I could earn my way back into her good graces. Except I wasn't there. For the first time in 19 years, Beverly Hawkins was going to have to face her morning without knowing exactly where her husband was or when he was coming back. The thought should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it felt like taking off boots that had been too tight for too long. I spent the morning driving back roads I hadn't seen in years, remembering what this part of the country looked like when you weren't rushing to fix someone else's emergency. Rolling hills, old farmhouses, abandoned barns that somebody's great-grandfather had built with his own hands. Around noon, I stopped at a roadside diner I'd never been to before. The kind of place where the menu was handwritten on a chalkboard and the waitress called everyone honey. I ordered a burger and fries and actually tasted my food for the first time in months. The older man at the next table was reading a newspaper, and I could see him shaking his head at something in the business section. When he caught me looking, he folded the paper and sighed. "Economy's got everybody scrambling," he said. "Young folks especially. Can't find work that pays enough to get them started in life." I nodded politely, but inside I was thinking about Quinn and his $1,000 gaming chair, about Elijah's expensive college courses that he might or might not finish, about Beverly's credit card bills for things we couldn't afford and didn't need. Sometimes, I said quietly, the problem isn't that young folks can't find opportunity. Sometimes it's that opportunity gets handed to them so easy they don't know what it's worth. The old man studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sounds like you've got some experience with that particular problem." More than I cared to admit. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, Two men who'd worked with their hands long enough to understand that some lessons can't be taught. They have to be learned the hard way. When I left that diner, I still didn't know where I was headed. But for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like freedom instead of fear. Back at the house, Beverly was discovering what life looked like without me in it. Not the dramatic, obvious stuff. The lights still worked, the water still ran hot, the refrigerator still hummed along, keeping things cold. But the small things, the things that made a house feel like a home instead of just a building, those were starting to unravel like a sweater with a pulled thread. It started with a coffee maker. I'd been the one getting up first for 19 years, starting the coffee, checking the weather, making sure everything was ready for the day. Beverly came downstairs expecting that familiar smell and found nothing but a cold, empty kitchen. Then Quinn discovered that the Wi-Fi was acting up again. For months, I'd been resetting the router every few days when it got overloaded, but I'd never mentioned it because it seemed like such a small thing. Now Quinn was standing in the living room with his phone, staring at bars that kept disappearing, wondering why his online games kept disconnecting. "Mom, what's wrong with the internet?" Quinn called out. Beverly, who was still trying to figure out how to work the coffee maker I'd always handled, just snapped back. "How should I know? That's your stepfather's department." Except their stepfather wasn't there to handle his department anymore. By afternoon, the kitchen sink started that slow drip I'd been meaning to fix for weeks. The kind of thing that would drive Beverly crazy if it went on too long. But she had no idea how to tighten a faucet washer or whether it was even something she could handle herself. Elijah tried to help by looking up YouTube videos on his phone, but watching someone else fix a sink and actually doing it yourself are two completely different things. After an hour of trying, he'd managed to make the drip twice as fast and flood the cabinet underneath. "Where does Dad keep his tools?" Elijah asked, water dripping from his hands. "In the garage," Beverly said, but when they went to look, they found my toolbox was gone, along with my work clothes, my spare boots, and the old army duffel bag I kept on the shelf since my service days. That's when it hit them. I hadn't just stormed off to cool down. I'd taken things. Important things. Things a man takes when he's not planning to come back anytime soon. Beverly stood in the empty spot where my toolbox used to sit, staring at the oil stain on the concrete floor like it might explain where her husband had gone and why he'd taken the tools that kept their world from falling apart. For the first time since I'd walked out that door, Beverly Hawkins realized she might have made a mistake that couldn't be fixed with an apology and a promise to do better. But by then, I was already 50 miles away and getting farther every hour. 3 days into my journey, I found myself in a small town called Millbrook, population 3,200 according to the faded welcome sign. The kind of place where Main Street still mattered and people waved at strangers just because it was the right thing to do. I'd stopped for gas and a sandwich when I noticed the commotion outside Franklin's Hardware. An older veteran in a worn army jacket was sitting on the curb, staring at a broken-down motorcycle that had clearly seen better days. His left leg was missing below the knee, and his prosthetic was visible where his pant leg had ridden up. "Engine trouble?" I asked, walking over. He looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "Won't turn over. Been trying to get her running for 2 hours." His voice carried that particular exhaustion that comes from fighting battles on multiple fronts. I knelt down and popped the engine cover. Old Harley, probably from the 90s, but well-maintained despite its age. "Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest. I'm Dale Fisher, and right about now, I'd welcome help from the devil himself." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, helping a man named Dale when I'd been running from my own problems. "Lester Hawkins. Let's see what she's telling us." 15 minutes later, I'd traced the problem to a corroded connection in the ignition system. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of issue that comes from a bike sitting too long without proper maintenance. I cleaned the contacts, tightened a few connections, and the Harley roared to life like it was eager to get back on the road. Dale's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "I'll be damned. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Just helping out a fellow service member." He studied my face for a moment. "Air Force. 22 years. You. Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan before this happened." He gestured toward his prosthetic. "Been struggling since I got back. PTSD, nightmares, the whole package. This bike's about the only thing that keeps me sane anymore." We talked for another hour about service, about coming home to a world that didn't understand what we'd been through, about the challenge of finding purpose after the uniform came off. Dale had been living in a shelter, trying to get back on his feet, but the system was slow and bureaucratic. "You got any place to stay tonight?" he asked as the sun started setting. I gestured toward my truck. "Been sleeping in there for a few days now. There's a cheap motel about 10 miles north. Clean beds, decent coffee, and the owner's a vet. Gives discounts to military folks. Follow me." As I drove behind Dale's motorcycle through the gathering dusk, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time since leaving home, I wasn't running away from something. I was moving toward something new. Maybe that something included helping people who understood what it meant to serve without expecting anything in return. A week had passed since I'd walked out of my own kitchen, and my phone had been silent as a gravestone the entire time. I'd powered it on twice, once to check if it was working, and once to see the time. Both times, the screen lit up with missed calls and text messages I wasn't ready to face. But sitting in that motel room in Millbrook, watching Dale work on his bike in the parking lot with the focused intensity of a man who needed something to keep his hands busy, I finally turned the phone back on and left it on. The messages came flooding in like water through a broken dam. 87 missed calls, 43 voicemails, more text messages than I could count. The first few voicemails were typical Beverly, irritated, demanding to know where I was, and when I was coming home to discuss this like adults. Then came Quinn's voice, casual and dismissive. "Hey Lester, Mom wants you to call." This silent treatment thing is getting old. But as the days progressed, the tone changed. Beverly's voice got tighter, more uncertain. "Lester, I know you're upset, but we need to talk about the business. There are things I don't understand." Then Elijah, sounding worried. "Dad, just call us back, okay? Mom's been crying, and Quinn's actually started looking for a job. I think we all messed up." The latest message was from Beverly, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, Les. I was wrong. About everything. Just come home and we'll figure this out. The boys miss you. I miss you. Nothing works without you here." I set the phone down and walked outside, where Dale was adjusting his bike's carburetor with the kind of patience that comes from having nothing but time and nowhere else to be. "Heavy call?" he asked without looking up from his work. "Family. They're starting to realize that taking someone for granted might not have been the smartest strategy." Dale nodded knowingly. "My ex-wife used to think I was just the guy who paid the bills and mowed the lawn. Never occurred to her that I might have opinions about how her life was going. Took me leaving for her to figure out I was more than just a paycheck with a pulse." "Did you go back?" "No." By the time she realized what she'd lost, I'd already figured out who I was without her telling me every day. He looked up from the carburetor. "Sometimes the best thing you can do for people is let them learn to appreciate what they had by living without it for a while." I thought about Beverly's voice in that last message, the defeat and fear that had replaced her usual confidence. Part of me wanted to rush home and fix everything, just like I'd always done. But another part, a part that was getting stronger every day, knew that going back now would just reset the cycle. They needed to learn that I was more than just the man who kept their lights on and their problems solved. And maybe I needed to learn the same thing. For the first time in a week, I had my answer about going home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. 2 weeks into my new life in Millbrook, I was finishing up a generator repair for Mrs. Patterson when the call came in. House fire on Elm Street. Family trapped on the second floor. Fire department stretched thin because their main ladder truck was down for repairs. I was closer than anyone else with the right equipment. My truck carried a 30-foot extension ladder for rooftop work, and I'd done enough emergency repairs during storms to know how to move fast when lives were on the line. When I pulled up to the burning house, I could see them, a woman and 2 small children at a second-story window, smoke pouring out behind them. The fire department was there, but their backup ladder wasn't tall enough, and the main crew was still 5 minutes out. "Sir, you need to stay back," a young firefighter called out. "I've got a ladder," I shouted back, already pulling it from my truck. 30 feet, rated for 500 pounds. The fire chief looked at my equipment, then at the family in the window, and made the call. "Do it." I'd set up ladders in ice storms and high winds, but never with a house burning around me and children's lives hanging in the balance. The ladder went up smooth and true, and I was climbing before the firefighters could argue about insurance liability and civilian involvement. The woman handed me her daughter first, maybe 4 years old, crying but trusting this stranger who'd appeared at her window. I carried her down and passed her to waiting arms, then went back up for the son, who was about 6 and trying to be brave for his mom. The mother came down last, just as the window frame started to buckle from the heat. By the time the main fire crew arrived with their equipment, all 3 were safe on the ground, and I was back by my truck, coiling up my ladder like it was just another day at work. The local newspaper wanted to interview me, call me a hero, put my picture on the front page. I declined politely and headed back to Mrs. Patterson's house to finish the generator repair I'd left half done. But word travels fast in small towns. By evening, my phone was ringing with people who'd heard about what happened. Folks wanted to thank me for helping their neighbors. Business owners offered me work because they decided I was the kind of man they wanted to do business with. Dale found me at the motel that night, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You know you're famous now, right? Half the town's talking about the generator guy who climbed into a burning building to save kids." "I just used the tools I had to help people who needed help," I said. "Same thing any decent person would do." "Maybe. But most decent people don't carry 30-foot ladders in their trucks, and most of them don't know how to set one up in under 60 seconds. That night, lying in my motel bed, I thought about the difference between being needed and being appreciated. Back home, I've been needed for what I could fix. Here, I was appreciated for who I was, a man with skills who was willing to use them when it mattered most. 3 weeks after the fire, I'd become something I'd never been before, a local legend. Not because I wanted attention, but because I'd done what needed doing when it needed doing. Word had spread beyond Millbrook, and I was getting calls from 3 counties over for generator work, electrical repairs, and emergency services. But the real change came when Beverly showed up. I was working on a backup power system for the elementary school when I saw her car pull up to the work site. 23 years of marriage, and I knew that walk, that determined set to her shoulders that meant she'd made up her mind about something and expected everyone else to fall in line. "Hello, Lester," she said when I climbed down from the utility pole. "Beverly." I didn't stop working, just kept organizing my tools. "Long way from home. We need to talk." "No, we don't. You made your position pretty clear 3 weeks ago. Apologize or leave, wasn't it?" I chose option 3, remember? She looked older, more tired than I'd ever seen her. The fight had gone out of her somewhere between the unpaid bills and the broken appliances she couldn't fix. "I was wrong. About everything. About you, about the boys, about what we had together. Yes, you were. The house is falling apart without you. The business is dying. Quinn got a job at a warehouse, and Elijah's been asking about trade school. They finally understand what you've been trying to teach them." I finished coiling my cable and loaded it into the truck. Good for them. Maybe they'll make something of themselves after all. "Don't you want to come home? Don't you miss us?" I looked at her standing there in her good clothes, probably the ones she'd worn to impress me into coming back. Behind her, I could see the elementary school where I'd just installed a system that would keep the lights on for kids during the next power outage. Down the street was the hardware store where Tom Murphy had offered me a partnership in his solar business. At the motel, Dale was probably working on his bike, clean and sober for the first time in months, because he'd found purpose in helping me with local emergency calls. "I miss the people I thought you were," I said finally. "But those people never really existed, did they? You were just playing roles until it was convenient to stop." Beverly started to cry, the kind of tears that come when someone realizes they've lost something that can't be replaced. "What do I have to do to fix this? How do I get you back?" "You don't. Some things, once they're broken, can't be fixed. They can only be rebuilt from scratch. And that takes both people wanting the same thing." I climbed into my truck and started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see Beverly standing there in the school parking lot, looking lost and small and alone. 23 years ago, that sight would have broken my heart. I would have gotten out of the truck, held her while she cried, and promised that everything would be okay, because that's what I'd always done. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was someone new. Someone who'd learned that his worth wasn't measured by how much other people needed him, but by how much good he could do when he was free to choose his own path. I drove away without looking back, heading toward a future that belonged entirely to me. In my rearview mirror, Beverly got smaller and smaller until she disappeared completely, like a chapter from someone else's story that I've finally finished reading.